As she said, my name is Leslie Fisher with the Kansas Department of Transportation. I've been using Lectora since about 2002 to build web-based training courses and surveys and tests, and I've been building accessible web content since about 1998 for the state of Kansas, several agencies. As she said, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the box and we will answer them at the end of the session. We've allowed plenty of time to do that. And if not, you can always email me directly. My contact information should be on the screen in front of you. So let's get started. On this first page is a list of things that I like to include with all of my courses. This is not just for accessibility, but a lot of it is for usability too. All of your users like to know what to expect in a course before they get into the course, especially if there are unique things such as navigation, or if there's narration in your course so that they need to have headphones on and not disrupt other people around them while they're taking training. Those are just things that are nice to add to all of your courses to let your users know what to expect before they get into the course and have surprises. Some of the other things that I like to include in my courses, and I typically include them in all of my courses, are for accessibility, and those are these three things that I have listed at the bottom of this page. One of the things that I always do in all my courses is include navigation shortcuts for non-mouse dependent navigation throughout my course. This helps those users that have physical limitations or range of motion limitations from having to use a mouse and rolling down here every time they need to click the next button or the back button. And typically I build those and then I save them in my Lectora library, which is this thing right over here. And those keyboard shortcuts can just be saved as library items that you can use in every single course. In my title, those items are listed right over there. And basically my keyboard shortcuts are the up arrow for the home page in the course or the first page in the course. Right arrow is for the next page in the course. Left arrow is previous page in the course. And the down arrow is to exit the course and close the course window. I also have a keyboard shortcut that is a Shift W key that I use to assign to close new windows because I open typically all of my links in a new window. And I can show you an example of assigning. Hopefully most of you know how to assign keyboard shortcuts and add the actions to them as you're building them. So this particular keystroke for the down arrow just executes the action that exits the course and closes the window. Another item that I typically include in all of my courses is a link to the page that explains those keyboard shortcuts. And that's just a usability as well as accessibility. Your people that are using JAWS screen reader software need to have information presented in a new window so that it's accessed by the screen reader. If I were to just put this up in a pop-up that was hidden on the page, the screen reader wouldn't read that and let them know that those shortcuts exist in the course for their benefit. The second thing on my list here is a skip navigation. This is also a compliance issue. You need to provide a way for users to skip over the redundant navigation that exists on every page in your course. And typically that navigation is, you know, your next and back buttons, your emergency buttons at the top, sometimes your header, also your graphics if you have graphics built into a group. But the skip navigation needs to be built so that it's in the right order in your title explorer on the page in order for it to work properly. Physically on the page, it's always best to include that skip navigation button as near to the top of the course as you possibly can in the course window, top left position. Maybe not at the 0, but certainly somewhere close to that area so that your user can activate that link immediately when they land on those subsequent pages of your course and don't want to hear that navigation read to them all the time. Your hidden target can physically exist anywhere on the page, and for this demonstration I've made the hidden target something that you can see, but typically your hidden target would not have text that you could read that said hidden target. You'd make the text match your background or just be a dot or something that you could hide on your page physically. The important issue is that over here in your Title Explorer, your skip navigation should be your first button in your button grouping so that it gets accessed first by the screen reader, and then the person can click on it and it will jump down, and your hidden target needs to be your bottom element at that title level so that it does in fact skip over all of that navigation when they click and activate that link. I wanted to test this to make sure that it would in fact jump on the page past the navigation and down to another area, and so I built a super long page to test it on. So here is my example of how that actually works. Again, you can see this page is extremely long for the purposes of testing, and I hid my hidden navigation down here just so that I would know that the page did actually jump down. And so my hidden button is right up here. As soon as the cursor changes, you can see that that's a button, and you click to it, and it does in fact jump down past all your header content down to your actual content of your page that you want your users to be able to access. The third thing that I include in all of my courses is a switch for accessibility, and I use this because I like to provide alternate content for people that need it, but provide the bulk of the content for the people that don't need that alternate content that are using assistive technology. So that switch is simply, I have assigned another keyboard shortcut, and I just call it, on the A key, I turn on a switch called accessible. And that switch is a variable that I built in Lectora, and if they hit that A key, it's going to modify that variable to 1 and essentially set that accessible switch at a value of 1. And I can use that value later on in my course when I'm using variables to determine whether or not I need to provide alternate content to my user. This is another item that I also save in my library and just drag into every new course that I build. So I also include this bit of text, which typically would not be visible on the page for the sighted user. I would make this text match the background of the page, but a screen reader would pick this up and read this to my user and tell my user that they need to select the A key now if they're using assistive technology, and that way they will be presented with different content in the course that they are able to use and access. The next thing I want to talk about is the basics of making a course accessible. And a lot of these basics are not really complicated or difficult to do, and you'll get in the habit of just doing them all the time, regardless of whether you know if your course needs to be accessible or not. A lot of them are also just very good developing content practices that you should use, best practices. Certain things such as using accessible font face, size, and colors. Kansas had a test group of users that we tested some of the font faces that they said were accessible and then asked for their preferences, and they did give us some preferences. And here's an example of some font faces. Arial is pretty typical of a font that's used that is accessible. However, for people with low vision or limited vision that aren't actually blind or totally visually impaired, so they're not using screen reader software, they're just maybe using other visual assistive technology, they don't really like the Arial because the letter spacing is too skinny between the tall skinny letters, and it's different throughout the text. And here's an example of that. The font at the top here is a Verdana 12 point, and it's pretty easy to read even for myself, which typically I need reading glasses to read text. And here's the Arial font at 12 point. Now, as you can see, it definitely takes up a lot less space. The letters are skinnier. The words that have multiple skinny letters side by side are hard to distinguish. And so that basically is just an example of providing more readable, user-friendly fonts to all of your users. Other things that you need to be aware of that are required as part of the compliance for accessibility is not to make content that is dependent on the color. An example of this, and my favorite example of this, is when they just say something such as the red text has been removed from the policy statement and replaced with this text. Well, if you had a color impairment, you wouldn't know what text was the red text. Another example I see a ton is instructing somebody to click on a certain colored button to have something happen, and the button doesn't have any text on it, and it's also the same size and shape as all the other buttons and maybe located beside other buttons that look exactly like it. Well, if you have a color impairment, you can't tell which button is the green button. So you would just correct this by saying, click the next button and make sure that your next button has text or some type of image on it to indicate that it's a next button and that it has the proper label. And that's how you correct that issue. Some other issues that I see a lot, or things that you need to be aware of, are to make sure that you use descriptive image names, video names, and audio names in your objects that you use in your course. If you're using any of the Lectora templates from past versions of Lectora, some of those don't always have the best names for those pieces and parts of those borders and banners that go around the page. They might just have like a series of numbers and an underscore, and so it's always best to rename those. And you can do that in the ribbon up above in version 11. It's just right up there above where you actually link to the file, and Lectora will actually put this default name in there for you as the name of your image. So if your image is properly named, you don't have to go in and do this. If your image is just 123.ping, you're going to want to go in and change this, because this is the description that a user will see when they point to that image on your page. That's what pops up in the little box when they point to an image. Another good idea is to make sure that you use descriptive page and chapter names in your courses. This is especially important if you reuse a lot of your content or you use the import from other title tool in Lectora. I do this a lot, especially with my beginning and end of course pages, just because they're the same in every course or very similar. And so it's always a good idea to change those names. Those names get read by the screen reader when the user accesses those pages. So having everything named page 1, page 2, page 3 doesn't really help them know or anticipate what the content is that's going to be on that page. It's also a good idea to make sure you identify your text blocks on your individual pages so that you know what they are. And this is especially important if you start building lots of actions or using lots of variables, being able to pluck those things out and knowing what they are. But it's also very important because we're going to discuss read order, and so you want to know which block of text is your title and your subtitle and your actual text, and what text might be hover text that's not visible, and so on. Another really important guideline to make sure that you meet is to make sure that your hyperlinks are descriptive, and don't use the click here option like you see on a lot of pages on the internet, but to actually refer to where that link is going. As I mentioned a minute ago, read order is very important, especially for people with the screen reader software such as JAWS or Window Eyes, some of those. And Lectora defines the read order. In a Lectora course, your read order is basically top to bottom, starting with everything that's inherited at the course level, so all of this stuff up here, and then followed by everything that's inherited at the chapter level, which I do not have a chapter in this course, so I can't show you that, followed by everything that's inherited at a page level. So on this page that you're looking at here, this is my read order after everything that's inherited at the title level. It's going to read my page title, this first text block, this second block of text here, then it's going to read the name of this image, followed by this final note that I've added at the bottom. And that's how I want it to read. However, when I built this page, that was not the order that I added these items to the page. And so I had to drag up and down in the Title Explorer to get them in the proper order before I published my course. And the best advice I can give to somebody about testing your read order is to attempt to print your Lectora course, but use the title or use the outline format, and it will actually give you the order of your read order for your page. And to do that, you would just simply go into your file and print, and down here, as you can see, this option here that says outline, and make sure all of your pages are selected, and then you would just generate a printed copy of your course, and it looks just like an outline view for, say, a PowerPoint presentation. But it does, in fact, list everything that's going to be on each and every page and in the read order that it will occur on each and every page. And that's always a very good way to do a final test of your course for read order. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the hover or drop-down menus that you can build in Lectora. Typically, they're not accessible because a screen reader just interprets this whole thing as one item. When you build it in Lectora, that menu is one object, and that's what the screen reader will read to the user. So they typically cannot access what's in each of the menus for these different categories because they're not even aware that there's anything there to begin with. What I like to do is build my own navigation and build my own buttons and create my own drop-down list that look and work almost identical to a drop-down menu, but they are accessible. So if I were to show you this in preview mode, you could see this looks like a typical menu. Now, instead of hover, they do have to click to access that drop-down menu. How I make this accessible is there's actually two of these drop-down menus on my page. Because if you'll remember, these blue boxes with the yellow text are not visible when the page loads. Anything that is not initially visible when the page loads does not get picked up by the screen reader and read to the user. So what I do to correct that is I also have the exact same menu, and I'll show you menu 1 here, is actually identical to the colored menu, but it is simply just white text on the white background. So whatever color your background is, you would make that text match that background. And the reason for that is because this page is initially visible when the page loads. So you can see I do not have the initially hidden checkboxed for this one. However, this one, that is the one that appears when they click on that button, is initially hidden, and it's also positioned always on top of the other one. And you can see by looking at this page, even though I haven't selected Chapter 1 button to make that menu drop down, that other hidden menu that's there for the screen reader is actually still usable. And that user can still select those items. They are there. Once you build the menu, save it as a group, and then you can use it on your pages. For the purpose of this demonstration, I did leave these chapters and pages named Chapter 1, Page 1, Page 2, just so I could demonstrate the menu. Typically, my course would never have chapter names and page names like this. They would be more descriptive than this. So I just wanted to make sure I clarify that. So a lot of users and developers like to present hover text or hover images or things of that nature that aren't initially visible when a page loads, just because it's a great way to add a whole lot of content to a page without the page looking overwhelming when the user first gets to it. You can still do that. Again, it's the same concept as with the menu. Here I have this page that has all of this text on it, and then we have a tooltip, and the user should point to the tooltip and reveal more information. Now, this information that's in this box is not initially visible when the page loads, so the screen reader doesn't pick this up. So what I've also done is provided the same information, and I call it the hidden text. It's the same information, white text against the white background. If my background was a different color, the text would be a different color. And it is visible when the page loads. So the screen reader does read this. And I always think it's important to make sure that in the title explorer that hidden text for the screen reader occurs before the tooltip button or the hover text, just so that that person with the screen reader, I can be sure that they get that information. But again, this information that's hidden to a sighted user is not initially hidden when the page loads. So the screen reader will read that information to that user that is using that assistive technology. If you don't want to hide extra text on your page, but you want to be able to present something in something that appears like a hover, you can also just build new pop-up pages and make your text pop up in a brand new window. When you launch a brand new window, that becomes the window that's in focus for the user, and so the screen reader will read the content of that window, just like my navigation shortcuts here at the beginning of my course. Once I click that link and activate that new window, then the screen reader, the focus becomes on this new window, and the screen reader reads that content to that user. So that is another way of providing additional information on a page without adding tons of extra pages to your course. A little bit of advice about video, animation, and audio tracks. You can add video to your courses. If they're courses of people demonstrating things, you're going to want to, and they're talking, you're going to want to make sure that that video is closed captioned. If it's something as simple as this item here on this page just happens to be an analog clock that counts down. And so I just provided a very good detailed description of what that animation was on the page and why it was there. And and I call that text equivalent. And again, it's simply just text that matches the background. It doesn't have to be in any certain font size because this is just for the screen reader, so I can make it as small as I need to fit everything that I need into that space. In my title explorer, I make sure that that item occurs before the actual animation. However, in the stacking order on the page, which is what I call it stacking order or layering order, that animation is at the top. So you won't see this clock with a bunch of invisible text layering over the top of it. The clock will still actually be on the top. One bit of advice that I do recommend is if you have audio on your pages, that you provide a way for them to turn them on and off. So either provide them with the controller or some other type of shortcut to turn the audio on and off. And this is mainly because you don't want that audio to initially start when that page loads. If you have a user that has JAWS, that's going to be really confusing for them because it's going to start playing and their JAWS is going to start reading to them. That's not a very good situation to have. And then also, your users may need to be able to pause that for whatever reason, and so it's always good to give the user control of audio and video in your course. again, the most important thing is to make sure that you have a text equivalent. If you have a video with a person demonstrating something, your text equivalent should be very detailed as far as explaining what that person is doing in that video, and also your closed captioning for your hearing impaired users. Currently, the games that are in Lectora, that come with Lectora, the Flash games, are not accessible. They do rely heavily on the user's ability to interact with the content physically and visually, so they are currently not accessible. If you know someone that can make Flash games accessible, then by all means go ahead and use them, but the intent of this course was to be able to make content that was accessible just with the tools that Lectora gives you. So what I recommend for people that want or need to use those games is to go ahead and use them and then provide alternate content for those users that can't engage with that game or activity. Usually, typically games like that are either trying to answer a series of scenario-based questions, or they're repeating a sequence of steps, or they're trying to render the information in another format to improve retention. So I ask a lot of questions in my courses for those three very reasons. I want to make sure that the user is engaged in the course and engaged with the content, that they're retaining the content, and in some cases that they can apply it back. So I always build my questions with the Lectora question wizard, which Lectora version 11, the question wizard is just like outstanding. I love that improvement that they've made. And I've been to the advanced class that Lectora teaches, which is a very great class on how to build custom questions. And if you have those skills and you can do that, by all means go ahead. Just make sure that your questions, that your read order of your objects for your question are in the correct read order, and that the labels are absolutely correct and associated properly. Because your user that shifts their keyboard to full input mode will need to have the benefit of making sure that that read order is correct and that those labels for each of those pieces of that question are correct. There are three types of questions. When you're building questions in Lectora, there are three that are not accessible. And those three types are the matching question, the drag and drop question, and the hotspot question. Those do really rely very heavily on physical and visual interactions between the user and the content in order to properly answer the question. So typically, if I need to use a question like that for something, I just also create an alternate question for users with assistive technology. And that's what I want to talk about now, because you can use those questions for your users that don't have assistive technology and simply develop an alternate question for users that do have assistive technology so that they can still get that benefit of that question. And you can do that with all of your content in your course. If you have sections of your content that need to be made accessible or that can't be made accessible and provide alternate content for that user, you just have to make sure you adjust your forward and backwards navigation to skip over that alternate content for your users and generate and direct your users to that alternate content that need them. That's why I created the accessible switch with the A key on the very first page of the course. Because I don't want my users to have to tell me every time they come up to something like that whether or not they need the accessible content. They can tell me at the beginning of the course, and then I will use that value stored in that variable to generate alternate content wherever I need it. So here's the description of pretty much what you need to do to provide your alternate content in your course. So the first thing you need to do is that in my example, I have two questions. I have a question 5, which is an accessible question, and I have a question 6, which is not an accessible question type. So I've created an alternate question 6 for my users with assistive technology. So on my normal question 5, which I call it normal because it's set up just like 90% of all my questions, and I use the check my answer button on all my questions. I feel like it gives the user a little bit more engagement and it makes them feel a little more in control. Plus now we can set the number of times a user tries a question, and so I was happy that I already had this feature built into all of my questions. On this page, however, I have to disinherit, because this is the page before question 6. I have to disinherit my next button and my next keyboard shortcut from this page at the title level and paste them on at the page level, because I need to change them based on whether or not the user needs the question 6 or the alternate question 6. So up here I've pasted them on at the page level, and I've just set that action to go to the next page if, and only if, that accessible variable is not equal to 1. Because if it's not equal to 1, then they don't need the alternate content. So they can have the question 6 that I created for the course. However, if that condition is not true, then that means accessible is equal to 1. Then I need them to go to this alternate question 6 instead. And this is a situation where that's going to do that in the existing course window. We're not going to launch that into a new window. The next piece of that is on my question 6. This is a matching question. So if my users land on this question 6, I don't want them to go next page and land on my alternate question 6. They don't need to see it. They've already answered this question. So I need to, again, disinherit my next arrow navigation and my next button navigation at the title level and paste them on at the page level so I can reconfigure those to skip over that question 6 when they hit the next button. And so that's what I've done here, is reconfigured those to go to the question landing page, which is the page that comes after my alternate question 6 in my Title Explorer. The other thing I need to do is make sure my backwards navigation works correctly. Well, backwards from question 6 is going to question 5, so that's fine. However, for my users that get the alternate question 6, I don't want them to go back to the other question 6. I want them to go back to 5. So again, I have to disinherit, but this time I'm disinheriting my back navigation because I want it to skip over the previous page and go back to question 5. And so I've disinherited it at the title level and pasted it on at the page level. And it's just, I'm just setting it that it's always going to go to question 5 when they hit the back button or the back arrow shortcut. The last thing you need to do is make sure that on your question landing page or whatever page occurs after you're done with your alternate content, you need to fix your backwards navigation on this page too. Because you don't know from this page, well, I mean, you do know, but you don't want them, if they land on the question landing from your regular page 6, you don't want them to go back to your alternate question 6. So again, you have to disinherit your backwards navigation, paste it on at the page level, and for this example, I just customized it to go back to question number 5. Let's just start over. So that is how you can present alternate content in your courses, and you can use these same tools and this same methodology to create alternate chapters in your content or entire alternate pages. You just have to make sure that you have your forward and your backward navigation going to the right places in your course so that your users are only getting the content or the alternate content. You don't want them to have to get both every time. The last thing I want to talk about is some tools that you can use that can help you with meeting your accessibility. The help section in the newest version of Lectora, version 11.2a, The help section has been greatly beefed up, and it has a lot more information in it about what you need to do to resolve compliance issues. Also, when you're building your course, you can turn on the 508 compliance check tool, and it will not let you add things to your course that are not accessible. If you're wanting to have a course where you're going to provide alternate content within your course for things that are not accessible, do not turn this feature on because it won't even let you add those items. I always recommend that people test and test thoroughly and often, and especially when there are changes or upgrades to browsers or operating systems, especially operating systems. And here's a list of some links to some free online testing tools. You can go out and Google these. A-Checker is the one I use the most. It just lets you publish your course to HTML, and then you can just copy the HTML for a page, paste it into their A-Checker, and it generates for you the issues and whether or not they're level 1 or level 2, and what checkpoints they coincide with so that you can resolve those issues. These other resources that are listed here, I've also added the links for those, or you can Google them. The W3C is where the actual policy exists, and then they have a section that's checkpoints for guidelines that provides you each of the guidelines and then provides you HTML examples of what your HTML should look like to satisfy those guidelines. This other link here called an accessibility color wheel, you can go to that and choose the colors that you're using on your pages, and it will render back the 3 different versions of color deficiencies and what that content looks like to those people with those color deficiencies. So it's kind of a slick tool to use. It really helps you with making sure you have enough contrast between your text and your background, and then making sure that you're not using colors that people that have color blindness or color deficiencies will have trouble interpreting. This eCampus link has some great accessibility tutorials on them, and they're written in a very easy to understand manner. And I did reference some of those for some of the content in this course just to make sure it was still up to par. And the PDF accessibility checker is the one link that I have not used, and so I can't speak for how easy it is to use. But I was given that link by our statewide accessibility coordinator, so I'm sure it's probably a very useful tool. On a final note, it's always best if you just locate the disability coordinator for your state. If they're aware of any groups or resources that you can use for testing your course or helping you with alternate content, or just especially if there's anybody out there that's working on web accessibility, if there's any groups at all, they are usually aware of those groups and how to get in touch with them. So I highly recommend you locate the disability coordinator for your state. Typically that person is going to be in your state government because they are the people that go out and check the physical accommodations for government buildings, city and state office buildings, and make sure that they meet access requirements for people with disabilities. So they are usually a huge wealth of information. I've reached the end of the content for this course, and I've hopefully allowed about 15 minutes for questions. The first question, as far as order, shouldn't the skip navigation button be at the top of the reading order? And yes, I do have it at the top of the reading order. I may have messed some things up when I was rendering this course for the last class. You can't put it at the top of the actions. Those automatically get lumped up here at the top of every part of your structure. but I do have my skip navigation above. Oh, I see what happened. My theme graphics. Yeah, I can drag those down. I do have my skip navigation above, and my theme graphics should be down here below my buttons actually. And then my hidden target is at the bottom of that laundry list of stuff for that section of my title. So yes. Okay, this next question, I was always taught to always put next and back at the page level to be properly accessible. Is that not true? Because of the way Lectora inherits things down to a page level for the title level, when I've tested these pages individually with my navigation at the title level, they still test out as being accessible at the title level. So I have always tried to use inheritance to my benefit at the title level, but I do also include the skip navigation. I have found that screen readers like JAWS tend to read the text for questions created by the wizard twice. Have you run across that? And what's the latest version of Lectora? I do know that that was an issue, and I did run into it with somebody at the conference, where some of the things that they added to the Lectora version 11 were causing unpredictable behaviors with questions and screen readers. And I do believe if you're running the latest version of Lectora, which is the 11.2a, with that patch, all those issues were resolved with that latest version, that latest update, which is the 2a version. So if you make sure you run that upgrade and regenerate your course, you should not have that problem. But definitely test it, and if it's still an issue, let them know. The other part of that question, Leslie mentioned version 2a. Can you paste in the URLs she is mentioning? I don't have a shortcut to those with me at this time. If you contact Lectora because you don't have the latest version and you're current on your maintenance, they should be able to send you that link. It did go out as a mass email, and I know here in state government, my automatic updates don't run either. I have to go out and download them every time because of firewall and other issues I have no idea about, but I do have to go out and run them myself every time. But it is the 11.2a that resolves those issues with the questions and some of the issues with actions not working on the first page of your course and a couple other things. Do I recommend Word documents over PDFs? I do not have experience with making Word documents accessible, but it's a lot of the same philosophies as far as font, face, size, keying between letters, colors, organizing your text. As far as PDFs, the other thing that you need to know is when you're making accessible PDFs, the tab order is important, and if you're making like completable PDFs, like forms or job applications, not only is that tab order important, but how you label those input fields is also important. So, I mean, it's all kind of, it's the same as building a Lectora course. Make sure that you label things so that you know what they are, and then also so that your user knows what they are. Just very good labeling is always a great idea, especially and definitely if you use the Lectora import from other title tool, which I use a ton, although now that they've got the library to where it works so fabulously, I don't have to use it as much as I used to, but still, labeling is always a good idea. Why is reading order top down and layering order bottom up, I don't know. That's I always just check my layering order because I think it has to do with the order that you add things onto a page. So typically when I build a page, I would put the image on there first, like the clock animation. So then I would have to generate the alternate description for that. And so adding that on the page, it's not going to add that in the right order. So I always typically have to drag things up and down in my title explorer to get them in the right order. And as far as stacking order, that's pretty consistent with most of the Microsoft applications too. You have to check that stacking order to make sure things land on top that you want to be on top. You mentioned closed caption text in video. Will a link to a transcript text also meet 508? Yes, it should. My example of closed captioning was, say for example, we have a course where we have a video that shows somebody how to properly wash their hands to make sure they don't cross-contaminate things. And so the person that's washing their hands is explaining what they're doing, but it's not exactly identical to the text that's on the page that explains. And so in that situation, we would want to close caption that. Now, if your video is a simple narration of identically what's on your page, then you've met that accommodation already. Does that, hopefully that answers the question. Do you set the text for readers, the ones that are the same color as the background, to be non-selectable so users won't see it when selecting text with their cursor? If you're talking about my text that's on a page that is not supposed to show like this, it's not linked text. So this piece of text I would make match my background, but it's not something that somebody would select with their cursor because it's not linked text. Now this is a link, and I do want it to pop open in a new window. But like this note here that is just for my screen reader users, and this hidden target, typically that text would match my background so that my sighted users wouldn't even see it was there. I do believe that's all of the questions. Somebody wanted to see the resources again. Here those are. Like I said, the one I use the most often is A-Checker. I did have somebody have a question about the down arrow button, and users with JAWS screen reader software use that down arrow button quite a lot when they're using that software, but the research that I looked up in between my two sessions here was that that user needs to switch to full keyboard input mode, and that would be the times when they would be using those arrow buttons, those down arrow and up arrow buttons, when they're doing input mode. So like when they're doing input for a PDF form or some other such thing, or even if they were answering questions like my Lectora questions, they might shift to that input mode for those Lectora questions. And that's another reason why I always use the check my answer button, is to make sure that they're not accidentally jumping past that question to the next page by using the next keyboard shortcut or the next arrow key or arrow button. All of these links on here are current. I did just recently test them all and make sure that they're current. You can Google any of these HTML checkers. If you have a tool that you can check with, great. I would recommend checking with more than one tool. And sometimes the stuff that you get may or may not be an issue. I mean, you really just need to be able to look at your content and figure out whether or not you've provided alternate content like you may get a flag if you have a video on a page, but if you have alternate content there and it's, like I say, bury it below your actual video, it is on the page, you know that you've met that requirement, even though that may still flag on an accessibility testing tool. Again, there's my contact information. If you have any questions, she said you could email info@lectora.com, or there's my direct email, and I'm also on LinkedIn.